Avatar: The Last Airbender is just an amazing show, isn't it? Intelligent writing, brilliant characters, and a simple but elegant magic system that ties beautifully into both its overarching narrative structure and its spiritual, philosophical undertones. Across its 3 seasons, each named after the element our protagonist Aang must master, the show presents bending not just as a system of magic, but as a nuanced system of thought. Each element representing a distinct way of living, shaped by its relationship to nature, culture, and the self. For example, the water tribes emphasize adaptability and healing, responding to life with patience and flow. The Earth Kingdom is grounded in endurance, resilience, and strength through unshakable conviction. And the Air Nomads teach freedom and detachment, a spiritual lightness both physical and emotional. But the Fire Nation? Well, the Fire Nation are the bad guys, right? It's kind of just that simple. At least, that's how Avatar frames it early on. For a good chunk of Season 1, fire is basically shorthand for evil. It's the weapon of the enemy, the thing burning down villages, the thing chasing Aang, Katara, and Sokka halfway across the world. And this makes sense, I think. Avatar is a fantasy kids show set during a war. We need clear stakes, clear threats, and fire is just such an easy visual symbol for all that. It's aggressive, it's loud, it's red and orange, and it gets everywhere. Seriously though, for a while in this first season, fire is simply framed as destruction, as domination, as the thing that needs to be stopped. And when almost every villain we meet can shoot flames from their hands, it's easy to buy into that. Sure, we do meet a few characters from the Fire Nation who are not completely evil, like the Fire Sage in the Winter Solstice 2-parter who helps Team Avatar find Roku's shrine room. But overall, the cultural nuance and philosophical depth, the sense of identity and moral complexity we get with the other elements and nations, just isn't really there with Fire. At least, that is until episode 16 of Book 1, titled The Deserter, which is for my money one of Avatar: The Last Airbender's most intelligent, thoughtful, and underrated episodes. Yes, because it's a great piece of storytelling in its own right. Yes, because it's clearly a homage to one of my favourite films of all time, Apocalypse Now. But I'm mainly referring here to how it deepens the moral texture of the show and challenges the simplicity of its early world building. The episode opens with Aang, Katara, and Sokka walking into a Fire Nation colonial village in the northwestern Earth Kingdom. The first of its kind we've seen in the show so far. And this glimpse into everyday life under the shadow of imperialism is our first hint that the episode is interested in something a little more complex than usual. You can really feel the weight of occupation throughout this scene, most notably the puppet show being put on for the children, which is kind of genius in my opinion. This is literally the first time we see a non-silhouette depiction of the series' main antagonist, Fire Lord Ozai, and it's in the form of juvenile propaganda. The image of Ozai is being shaped long before any of these kids are old enough to understand what he really represents. And the show doesn't even try to underline this with any kind of moral lesson. No, it just lets the moment sit. It's really quite chilling. Anyway, eventually Team Avatar are found out and they escape with the help of Che, who explains to them that he serves a living legend named Jeong the Deserter, who defected from the Fire Nation army. We haven't even met the episode's titular character yet, but the mere mention of this guy's existence seriously challenges the image the show has built around the Fire Nation thus far, because up until now we've only seen fire as a source of pride, a symbol of strength, loyalty, and power. But Jeong's defection complicates things massively. It suggests shame, disillusionment, the idea that not everyone inside the system believes in what it's doing, or even in what firebending has become. And that alone shifts something. It forces us to stop seeing the Fire Nation as a monolith. We are not a monolith! Anyway, by the time we finally meet Jeong, the anticipation has been carefully built. The episode doesn't rush his introduction. He's talked about with reverence and mystery, but also fear. And when we do finally meet him, sat alone, surrounded by candlelight, half in shadow, the guy does not disappoint. To me, Jeong is perhaps Avatar: The Last Airbender's best one-off character. I mean, yes, he turns up again in Sozin's Comet for a glorified, albeit badass cameo, but this is the only time we really get to sit with him. And what makes him so compelling is that he doesn't fit the usual mentor mold. He's not playful like Iroh, eccentric like Bumi, or bound by tradition like Pakku. No, he's tortured, scarred, both physically and spiritually. Philosophical to the point of exhaustion, Aang is excited to learn firebending, and we are excited to watch him learn. But jeong refuses to teach him, not because Aang lacks talent, he's the Avatar, but because he hasn't yet mastered the deeper internal discipline firebending requires. To master the bending disciplines, you must first master discipline itself, he says. Now, that line might sound simple, but in context it's deeply important, because fire, unlike the other elements, comes from within. It's not borrowed from the environment or redirected from some external source. It's generated. It's fueled by intent. And without that discipline, you get people like Zhao and Ozai and Sozin. You get fire as domination, as conquest. You get 100 years of war and bloodshed. When jeong finally agrees to train Aang thanks to a somewhat cryptic vision from Avatar Roku, we get what looks like the start of a classic training montage. But it's not. It's actually kind of the opposite, and I just think it's so cleverly done. Because Aang, being a 12-year-old, just wants to shoot fire from his fingertips, like every firebender who's been chasing him across the world for the past 15 episodes. But jeong's instructions and teachings are far less exciting. It's all about stillness and breath work and feeling the sun. It's actually kind of boring. And this is all supposed to play on our expectations and desires. Because we want to see Aang learn firebending just as much as he does. We want progress and spectacle. We want him to be able to use the powers of his enemies against them, to fight fire with fire, literally. And I think we're supposed to find all the philosophical, meditative stuff about breathing and feeling the sun a bit of a letdown. And in the end, both the audience and Aang are punished for this when the young Avatar ends up burning Katara due to his hastiness and lack of respect for jeong's teachings. This isn't just a dramatic turn, it's a thematic one. We're being punished for our impatience, just like Aang is. Because firebending, unlike the other elements, is driven entirely from within. It begins with breath, with will, with intent. It's not about redirection or balance or flow, it's about what you generate and whether you can control it. And Aang, still impatient, still young, still performing, clearly can't. When he burns Katara, it's not framed as an accident. It's a failure, a direct consequence of rushing to unlock power without understanding it. And that failure sits heavy, not just for Aang, but for the viewer, because ultimately it's this same mix of ego, impatience, and unchecked desire for power that started the entire conflict of the show in the first place. Katara runs off and eventually discovers that she has healing abilities, something jeong is envious of. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the only moment in the entire series where a bender wishes they could bend another element instead, and I think it says a lot about jeong. His entire perspective around firebending is clearly framed by his trauma and guilt. He sees it not as a gift, but as a curse. And look, while I don't think the show 100% agrees with jeong's philosophy on firebending as we go on to learn more about the martial art in later seasons, the Deserter does definitely change and deepen the way we look at firebending. This isn't just a combat skill. It's a mindset, a philosophy, a moral stance. And the episode draws that line clearly through the contrast between jeong and his former student Zhao, who represents how the Fire Nation, through militarism, through conquest, have warped firebending into something volatile, performative, and reckless. A far cry from how ex-Fire Nation soldiers jeong and Iroh discuss the art.
Power in firebending comes from the breath. That is why you must master proper breath control.
No, power in firebending comes from the breath, not the muscles.
Again, think back to jeong being envious of Katara's waterbending and healing abilities, or how Iroh learnt to redirect lightning by studying waterbenders, and then watch how jeong actually firebends. I don't think he shoots a fire blast once. No, it's much closer to waves, to waterbending. And I think that's the point. Jeong is trying to unlearn the dominant firebending ideology, to reconnect it to something calmer, more internal, less destructive. By bending fire like water, he's not just showing restraint, he's reclaiming the element from the war machine that twisted it. It's pretty sick if you think about it, and marks our first real glimpse into the deeper nuance of firebending, something the show explores even more in episodes like the Firebending Masters. It's also no coincidence that when Aang eventually agrees for Zuko to be his teacher, it's partially Probably because Zuko, like Jeong, recognizes that fire isn't just power, it's something dangerous, and something that demands discipline and restraint. And all this thematic, philosophical, and spiritual tension surrounding firebending culminates in the climactic duel between Aang and Zhao, a classic Avatar The Last Airbender third act, which ties everything together in a way that feels both cathartic and earned. After Jeong delivers what is surely the most impressive non-comet enhanced firebending display in the entire series before disappearing into the woods, Zhao squares up to Aang and the battle commences. But this isn't your standard fight, because while Zhao sees fire as domination, as brute force, Aang approaches it with something else entirely. Avoidance, stillness. He doesn't strike back, he doesn't retaliate. No, he just lets Zhao exhaust himself, dodging each reckless attack, using his opponent's aggression and warped understanding of firebending against him, until the Admiral has quite literally set his entire fleet ablaze. A perfect metaphor for how easily fire can turn on its wielder when driven by ego instead of control. This is not a flashy victory for the Avatar. No, it's a quiet, philosophical one, the kind that could only come after everything we've just seen. Because what this fight reveals is that Aang, the goat, is actually... Because what this fight reveals is that Aang has actually been listening. He's internalized Jeong's warnings, not just about fire's danger, but about what it demands. Control, intention, balance. And even though Aang isn't ready to wield fire himself, he now understands the stakes of that power in a way he simply didn't before. And we, the audience, learn a similar lesson. Yes, about the complex cultural nuances of the Fire Nation and firebending that just weren't really present before, but also about the nature of power itself. About how true strength isn't found in domination or display, but in self-mastery. Overall, The Deserter is, in my opinion, one of Avatar The Last Airbender's best and most underrated episodes. It really is a perfect example of the sheer maturity the show was capable of at its peak, challenging the black and white morality Season 1 often leans on, and introduces us to something much more layered, firebending not as evil but as volatile, something that demands restraint, discipline, and understanding, an ancient art that is incredibly dangerous when fueled by ego, impatience, or pride. Through Jeong's philosophy, Aang's failure, and Zhao's downfall, the episode begins to slowly peel back the layers of firebending, which is for me maybe the most nuanced of all the bending disciplines, and in doing so, it quietly shifts the moral framework of the show itself, from a story about fighting back, to a story about how. But that is going to be it for now. I love talking about this incredible show, it really is one of my favourite things to do, and I now can confirm that production of my long-awaited review and ranking of Book 2 Earth has commenced. I cannot give any promises on when it will be out, only that it should be finished before George R.R. Martin releases The Winds of Winter. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think of The Deserter in the comments section, and what episode of Avatar you think deserves more love. And I will see you in the next one. Have a great day.